It was a warm summer evening in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of place where life seemed simple, and everyone minded their own business. But that sense of calm was shattered when Officer Bradley, a man known for his strict, no-nonsense demeanor, pulled up to a small park on a routine patrol. The park was lively, with kids playing basketball, families picnicking, and music spilling out of portable speakers. But one group caught his attention: 3 young black girls sitting on a bench, laughing and minding their own business. Bradley's eyes narrowed. He had his own assumptions, the kind that made him prone to acting before thinking. He parked his cruiser and walked over, his hand resting on the baton at his side. Without introduction, he demanded, "What are you doing here?" The girls, no older than 14 or 15, looked up, startled by his harsh tone. One of them, Tasha, spoke up, her voice calm but tinged with confusion. "We're just hanging out, sir." "Is there a problem?" Bradley didn't like her tone. In his mind, it sounded defiant. He decided he needed to make an example of them, though there was no evidence of wrongdoing. "Stand up," he ordered, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. The girls exchanged worried glances. "But we didn't do anything," said another girl, Mia. Her voice cracked with fear, but Bradley wasn't interested in explanations. He radioed in a report about suspicious activity and insisted they comply. "You'll have your chance to explain at the station," he said coldly, as he started to cuff Tasha. The other 2 girls protested, pleading for him to stop. Bystanders began to gather, recording the scene on their phones, murmuring disapproval. Despite the growing crowd, Bradley was unbothered. He was the law here, and he believed he was untouchable. The girls were scared but cooperative, not wanting to escalate the situation. But as Bradley was putting Tasha in the back of his cruiser, something strange happened. A commotion erupted nearby, pulling everyone's attention. From behind the park's tree line, a disheveled man stumbled out, yelling incoherently. His clothes were torn, and his face was pale and sweaty. At first, people thought he was drunk or on drugs, but then they saw the knife in his hand. Panic spread like wildfire. The man was clearly agitated and unpredictable. He waved the knife wildly and screamed something incomprehensible, causing families to grab their kids and run. But his erratic movements brought him closer to the police cruiser and Officer Bradley. Bradley, realizing the danger, stepped back and reached for his gun. "Drop the knife," he commanded, his voice shaking slightly. The man didn't listen. Instead, he locked eyes with Bradley and started charging toward him. In that split second, Bradley's confidence crumbled. He fumbled with his gun, the weight of the situation bearing down on him. The knife-wielding man was getting closer, and Bradley's commands seemed to fall on deaf ears. His backup was still minutes away, and the crowd was too terrified to intervene. Then, something unexpected happened. Tasha, still sitting in the back seat of the cruiser with her hands cuffed behind her back, shouted through the open window, "Behind you!" Bradley turned just in time to see the man lunging at him. He dodged the initial attack but lost his footing and fell to the ground. The man loomed over him, the knife glinting in the streetlights. Bradley screamed for help. "Somebody do something." But the crowd remained frozen in fear, their phones still recording. That's when the 2 other girls, Mia and Kayla, acted. Despite their fear, they ran toward the man, picking up rocks from the ground as they went. Without hesitation, they hurled the rocks at him, one striking his arm and another hitting his side. The distraction was enough for Bradley to recover and kick the knife out of the man's hand. Bradley quickly subdued the attacker, pinning him to the ground until backup arrived. The crowd erupted in relief and applause, but Bradley wasn't celebrating. His heart was pounding, not just from the near-death experience but from the realization of what had just happened. The very girls he had unjustly arrested had saved his life. As other officers arrived and took the man into custody, Bradley stood there, speechless. He walked back to his cruiser, where Tasha was still seated in the back. He unlocked the door and helped her out, his hands trembling. I'm sorry," he muttered, avoiding her eyes. "I shouldn't have here." Tasha cut him off, her voice steady despite everything. "We didn't deserve what you did. But we couldn't just watch you get hurt." Bradley nodded, shame washing over him. He uncuffed all three girls, apologizing to each of them. The crowd watched, some still skeptical of his sudden change of heart, others quietly hopeful that this moment might stick with him. The girls left the park that night, their bravery the talk of the town. And Bradley, for the first time in his career, went home questioning everything he thought he knew about his job, his biases, and the people he had sworn to protect. It was a night that would stay with him forever, a stark reminder of the humanity he had overlooked for far too long. The night was long for Officer Bradley. When he got home, he sat at his kitchen table, still in his uniform, staring at his reflection in the dark window. The adrenaline had worn off, but the guilt remained, gnawing at him. He replayed the events in his mind of the girls' terrified faces, the sound of their voices pleading for fairness, and, most of all, their courage when they didn't have to act. Why had they helped him? He knew the answer, because they had humanity, the kind he had denied them the moment he judged them by their appearance. Bradley realized he owed them more than an apology, he owed them justice. The next morning, he returned to the station earlier than usual. His colleagues were buzzing about the incident, some praising his takedown of the knife-wielding man, others joking about the civilians who'd stepped in to save him. Bradley didn't join the banter. Instead, he went straight to his superior's office. "Chief," he began, his voice hesitant but resolute. "We need to talk." The chief raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About what I did yesterday," Bradley admitted. He took a deep breath and confessed everything of the baseless arrest, the assumptions he made, and the way the girls had shown more bravery and integrity than he ever had. The chief listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When Bradley finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then the chief leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You're lucky those girls didn't press charges or take this to the media," he said. "But you're right. You owe them. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I want to make it right," Bradley said firmly. "And not just with them. I need to change the way I approach my job." The chief nodded, seemingly impressed by his sincerity. "Start by reaching out to the girls. Apologize, and listen to what they have to say. After that, we'll talk about retraining and community outreach. You've got a lot to prove, Bradley." Later that day, Bradley found himself standing outside Tasha's house, a modest home with a tidy garden. He had tracked down her address through department records, something he knew he had to use responsibly this time. His heart pounded as he rang the doorbell. Tasha's mother answered, her expression wary when she saw the uniform. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone guarded. "I'm Officer Bradley," he began. I came to apologize to Tasha and the other girls. Is she home? The woman looked skeptical but called out, Tasha, come here. Moments later, Tasha appeared, her eyes widening when she saw him. Behind her, Mia and Kayla peeked out from the living room. Bradley took off his hat, clutching it nervously. I wanted to say I'm sorry, he began. I was wrong to treat you the way I did. There was no reason for it, and you didn't deserve it. What you did last night at Broken Bar, you showed me more kindness than I showed you, and I'll never forget that. Tasha crossed her arms, studying him. Why now? She asked. Why didn't you think about this before you put handcuffs on me for no reason? I've been asking myself the same thing, Bradley admitted. The truth is, I let my biases control me, and I've been doing that for too long. I'm trying to change, but I know an apology isn't enough. I want to hear what you think I can do to make things right. The girls exchanged glances, surprised by his candor. Tasha spoke up again, her voice firm but less harsh. If you're serious, then stop treating us like suspects just because of how we look. And don't just apologize to use our work on fixing how the whole system works. There are other kids who won't get this chance. Bradley nodded. You're right. And I promise, I'll do everything I can to make this a turning point. Over the following weeks, Bradley kept his word. He joined a local community outreach program, working with youth groups and attending workshops on racial bias and policing. He participated in town hall meetings, where he listened to residents share their experiences with law enforcement, many of which mirrored what he had done to the girls. Each story was a painful reminder of how much work needed to be done, but Bradley didn't back down. He also stayed in touch with Tasha, Mia, and Kayla, inviting them to speak at community events about their perspective. The girls, hesitant at first, grew more confident in sharing their story, knowing it could inspire change. Months later, Bradley was a different man. He wasn't perfect, a change didn't happen overnight, but he was trying. And as word spread about the transformation in him and his efforts to repair the trust he had broken, he began to notice something new. The respect he was earning wasn't out of fear or authority, but because he was finally living up to the badge he wore.